Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Julia Myers, and I will be your host, and we are coming to you live from the Brooker Creek Preserve Environmental Education Center. We have a wonderful program in store for you all this morning. We are going to meet the Mantids with Miss Liz Childress, who is a Brooker Creek volunteer, and she is the leader and creator of our Family Fun Friday morning program. So we are super excited to have her with us today. We are recording the webinar, just so you know, so it will be up on our YouTube channel probably by next Tuesday for anyone who wants to watch it again. And we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation with Miss Liz, and then she is going to have a little show and tell time, and we will actually meet some mantids. And then we will have time for questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can put a question in there at any time throughout the program, and then we will get to all the questions at the end. So not to worry, we will get to them. And without further ado, I think we are good to get started. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, Julia. I think we are ready to meet the mantids, the insects world's kung fu experts. And I'm very, very excited to be able to talk to you guys about these insects because they're among my favorites. Our journey with the mantids. What we're going to explore are who are the mantids? What about roaches? How does that fit in? How do mantids live? Why the kung fu? Which ones live in Florida? And then we may have some special guests. You ready to explore? I am. Let's go. What makes a mantid a mantid? Mantids are mostly long, large, skinny insects well, actually, they're not all large. Some are teeny. And some get to be pretty big, but they have triangular heads and they have 5 eyes. What we see mostly are these big compound eyes. They have about 10,000 little eyes within those compound eyes. And then you see this little black dot? That's a pseudopupil. And that's showing us where the mantis is focusing its vision. It actually can see quite sharply when it focuses its vision. That's how it can judge how to catch prey. They are able to look over their shoulders, much that's not terribly common in the insect world. And that just gives them a really good ability to be able to see their prey. They can rotate their heads about 180 degrees. And this is their thorax, and there's their head, and they have a special joint right here. And here, this neat part of it, they have raptorial forelegs. That just means they have big front legs that they can use to get their prey. They are extraordinarily strong. I know this because I was feeding a mantid, and instead of using tweezers, I used my fingers, and she grabbed my fingers. Now, it didn't hurt, but it was really difficult to get her off my finger without hurting her. She really had a hold of it, and I was just amazed at how strong she was. Okay, today's fun big word is taxonomy. And that's the science of classifying animals and plants to figure out which ones are related based on several characteristics, both how they look, what their structures are, and their genetics. It's really interesting. This science has changed a lot since we learned more about genetics. I used to think that falcons were hawks, but now some scientists think that falcons are really more closely related to parrots. So if you have a pet parrot or a parakeet or a cockatiel, you may have a pet falcon there. How about that? Anyway, back to the mantids. Alrighty, they are animals and arthropods, just like spiders and stuff. Hexapods, insects, they have 6 legs, and they live in this superorder along with roaches and termites, and that's Dictoptera. They're their own special family, Mantodia, the mantids, and they are in Mantidae, and this particular mantis is our Carolina mantid. She's a stagmomantis, and her species is Carolina. So that's a lot of great big words right there. But it's kind of interesting to know how mantids fit into the insect world, and especially this part. What? Okay, so here we're looking at a picture of our particular insects that are kind of closely related. We have our guys down here in this Dictoptera order that we had looked at, the Mantodia, Blatodia, which is roaches, and Blattidia, which is termites. And some scientists think that our beautiful praying mantises really don't belong in their own order. They belong right in there with roaches. Can you see a family resemblance there? I can. And it's interesting that I just think mantids are so interesting. And I'm from Florida, and I'm still trying to get over the flying roaches. They kind of creep me out a little bit. But they're neat. All right, so there we go. Mantids, roaches, not that different. What's in a name? Do we have praying mantids or praying mantises? You've probably heard both of these terms. I think that the way that I understand it now, and it could change because scientists are working on classifications right now, a mantid means all of the mantids that are in this particular order, and a mantis is a specific group of them. So most of the mantids we see are mantids, and only some of them are mantises. I don't think we have any native mantises here in Florida. Are they praying mantids, or are they praying mantids? Well, you could say with these raptorial forelegs, remember that? Yeah, they do prey upon things. That means they are very good predators and they eat prey. But I think that it really refers to the fact that they look like they might be in prayer with their forelegs up like this. So that's what's in a name. Let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of our mantids. They live from spring to late fall out in the wild. When they mate, we've all heard, or possibly have heard, that sometimes the male gets eaten, but that doesn't always happen. I think that a lot of times the males will get away, particularly in nature, where they're not confined in an enclosure. And also, if the female's been well fed, she's not going to do anything like that. The eggs are laid in fall in a case called an ootheca. It's really kind of interesting the way that this is done. They hatch in spring. And here's some pictures of some ootheca. When the female mantis lays these, the mantid lays these, they're kind of frothy and foamy, but then they harden up and become wonderful weatherproof protectors of the eggs. Here's something fun. These are Grasslike Mantids. Here's their ootheca, and they just hatched. And let's watch them walk around. You can see these guys over here. They're just trying to figure out how to use their legs. They're not trying to eat each other. This one's being mellow, and that one just did a big wipeout. So, you know, these guys are little. They're about that big, and they look a lot like ants. And I have read bits and pieces that it's thought that perhaps that's one of their kind of camouflage things when they're young. And here's another picture of some newly hatched grass mantids. This one's actually been hatched for maybe about 20 minutes or so. It's darkened, that means it's hardened up, and this one's brand new. His exoskeleton, that's his outer cuticle, his outer skin, hasn't hardened up and turned dark yet. So mantids go through incomplete metamorphosis. And some of you may have heard this term, and that means that they don't have a stage where that they go into a cocoon or a pupa like butterflies. They basically hatch out as they look like tiny little adults, and then they molt several times, and then they become full adults. Mantids tend to molt 6 or 7 times, particularly the kind that I've studied, before they're full adults. And you can see right here, I've got a newly molted mantid, and that is the shed skin or the exuvium. Molting is hard. This takes the insects a while to do. They have to kind of set themselves up for a while. I can tell when the ones that I have are getting ready to molt because they'll stop eating, and then they kind of hang upside down just from their behind legs. Mantids are kind of lucky in the fact that they can actually shed their skin, their actual skin, pretty fast. Some insects take several hours. These guys could be done in like 15 or 20 minutes. It's hard work. One of the things that I learned about molting is mantids and most other insects, they shed the lining of their breathing holes. They have these little spiracles that they breathe out of, and that lining actually comes out when they molt. And they also shed part of their stomach lining. So that's a lot of work that goes on molting. It's hard. What about Kung Fu? Kung Fu mantids. I found that there is a branch of Kung Fu that was started 350 years ago. And it's by a person who observed how mantids hunt, how effective they are, and what they do to defend themselves. So this person created a branch of Kung Fu based on mantids. Some moves are the hook and a grasp, a strike, and an upward block, just like a mantis does. You can see this right here. Want to see some mantid Kung Fu? Here is a grass mantis with prey, and watch these forelegs as she kind of does a Kung Fu move. There she goes, she's kind of swaying, and she's moving her little forelegs, bam, and now she has her prey. She looks really spindly, but she's actually quite strong. So that is a Kung Fu mantis. Apparently, they can strike as fast as they can strike in 1/300th to 1/600th of a second. So that's really, really good. Fast little guys. Whoops. How about some native Florida mantids? Let's talk a little bit about which mantids we have here. We have our grizzled or bark mantids. Those are really fun. Here's what they look like. They look like a piece of bark. This one's pretty easy to see. Can you see them now? They blend right in. They're really, really hard to see when they're not on a wall or on a screen or something like that. They're really awesome insects. We also have Grasslike Mantids, which you saw before. Scudder's Mantids, which look a little like these guys. The larger Florida mantid looks a lot like a basic edition praying mantis, kind of a larger green thing. We have Bruens Mantids, which we'll meet in a second. They're freak shows. And our Carolina Mantids, which are the most common or the easiest to see, and they look like your basic mantid. So let's meet a few of Brooker's Mantids. This is our basic Carolina Mantid. And this is kind of your classical mantid. It looks like what we think a praying mantis should look like. You can see the compound eyes, and you can see where this one's looking. It's a female because she's got a kind of a big abdomen on her. And you can see her raptorial, effective forelegs there that she used to catch prey. Here's another one. This is Bruner's Mantid, and this has been recorded at Brooker Creek. And I just think these are really awesome. They're fairly large mantids, and they have these awesome antennae, and they're long and spindly, and look at the forelegs they have on them, and they seem to have kind of a neat expression on their faces. I have not seen one at Brooker. I wonder why. Here they are here, and they're so well camouflaged. Maybe sometime I'll get to see one. I hope so, because I think they're really interesting. Here's our Grasslike Mantid, which also lives at Brooker. And you can get a better look at those forelegs that this mantid uses to catch prey. They don't have as many spines as a Carolina or some of the other mantids do, but they're just as strong, and their prey doesn't get away. Now, there's a couple of species of non-native mantids that are here in Florida. This is the European mantid, and actually it is in the genus Mantis, religiosa, and that's where it gets the praying part. You can kind of see it's praying right here. An easy way to tell that you've got a European mantid is this spot right here on its foreleg. You've got a pretty big spot. And our Carolinas and the other mantids that look a little bit like this don't have that spot. There's also a narrow wing mantid that can be found in Florida. And then possibly in Florida, but mostly in more northern states, is the Chinese mantid. And these are the great big ones. They're huge. If you've been up in states that are north of Florida, you've probably seen one, especially in the fall. They are giant. They've come here in the pet and in the garden trade. There's some concern that they might be switching from just exotic insects to something that's invasive that might actually be affecting the ecosystem, because they are pretty predatory. At one point, garden centers would sell mantid egg cases. I think they usually were the European mantids, and people would release them in their yard thinking that they were doing a wonderful thing. But there's some concern that these mantids have, they may be having an impact on our native Florida mantids and maybe some other things. There's also a growing pet trade with mantids. Got to be very, very careful with that, because it's very tempting to let them go if you can't care for them anymore, but that cannot happen. There's some concern that we have a different species of bark mantis that's getting established in Miami, which isn't good. So we have to be very careful with pet mantids. And I do believe that they're going to be either now or shortly, you're going to need a permit to keep a non-native pet mantid. I think that's good. Let's take a look at some mantids from around the world. This is the emperor mantid from Africa. And I think those are really interesting looking. Look, he's got a little crown right here, just like an emperor. And we've got the devil's flower mantid, again, from Africa. And I like the designer antenna and the pink look right here. And look at these forelegs. That's some forelegs right there. Here's the orchid mantid. You may have heard of this one. These guys are actually quite small when they're grown up. And they do little fake flower things. That's their shtick. And they are from Malaysia and Indonesia. And you do see these offered as pets sometimes, but they're quite difficult to keep because they require a lot of humidity and special light. So keeping pet mantids is kind of hard. You have to know their requirements and make sure that you take good care of them that way. And be careful never to let them go. This is a boxer mantid. I believe this one's from Africa as well. And I just think it looks really cool with this little spikes on its rear and those awesome boxer glove forelegs. And here's our spiny flower mantid. Beautiful legs, nicely banded forelegs, beautiful wings, these are wings, and nicely banded forelegs here. This mantid actually, we see pictures of mantids doing this. This mantid's upset and it's afraid. So what it's trying to do is show that it's fierce and that it's big by flaring its wings out and hoping that it's going to deter any predators or anything that might want to bother it. You may have seen this kind of behavior if you've encountered a mantid in the wild, because sometimes they'll do this display. Kind of neat. Look at that. Pretty awesome. Okay, well, this is the end of our presentation. This is a Carolina mantid. Or is it the end? What do we have in store here? Do you want to meet a mantid? I have a few. Let's see if they're in cooperative moods. All righty. This, let's see, is a female Grasslike Mantid. And you can tell right now that she's rather upset because she's got her forelegs straight out and she's trying to look just like a piece of grass right now. Let me see if I can get you a better view.
Yeah, and Liz, when you get a second, we can stop the share and get a full screen there.
That's a great idea. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So if we can get a better view of our Grasslike Mantid, she's starting to relax a little bit. Her forelegs aren't quite as in line with her face. And I can tell she's a female because she has a very tiny antenna. And she is one molt away from being a complete and total grown-up. And she's a fierce little predator. And this particular insect is pretty mellow. Believe it or not, they have different personalities. I have some that are quite skittish, some that are pretty mellow, some that are like to run around in their enclosures and outside their enclosures when they get a chance, and some that just like to sit there. So there is an almost fully grown Grasslike mantid. And these mantids live here in Florida, but they're very, very difficult to see because they blend in so well. Our next one that we're going to look at is a male Grasslike Mantid. And he's going to be real interesting to deal with because he can fly. The females don't fly, they don't have wings. And here he comes, and he's flighty. So he can be kind of interesting to deal with. Look at his beautiful antenna. And that's character, oh dear, there he goes. And he just settled down over here off the screen. So as you can see, the males can fly. The females cannot in this species. Yep, there he is with his long antenna. Here is another male mantid. Let me see if I can get this guy out. And you can see he's not quite fully grown. He doesn't have the wings. But I think you can see the antenna, which lets us know that in a few molts, wait, there he is, that he's going to be a male. The females, again, have shorter antenna. And there he goes. Yeah, he wants to go underneath and sort of hide. This one's shy. Can you see him? All right. We'll put him back. Wait, look at his antenna. Oh, yeah, there he goes. Yeah, he's shaking a little bit, kind of trying to blend in and figure out what's going on with his surroundings. All righty. There you go. I see my other mantid over there. That's funny. Yeah, he'd had enough of being on camera. I've got something else to show you that's not a mantid. Well, it was a mantid. But remember when we talked about how molting is hard? This is the shed skin of one of our mantids. And you can see the legs. I'm holding the legs right here. This end that's closest to my fingers is where the mantid's rear end was. And then that thing that looks like a T on the other end is where the forelegs and the head and the thorax were. And remember how we talked about how difficult it is for insects to molt? I have to take a lot of care at this time to keep them like cool enough and humid enough so that their skins can come off and that they can be just fine. Let me show you another one. This one's fun. Come here, little dude. I'm wrangling mantids right now. All right, let's see how this works. This tiny little guy has shed twice. So this particular mantid is 2 molts away from being a little bitty baby and doing fine. Can't really tell if it's going to be a male or a female yet from the antenna. That usually happens around molt 4 or 5. You can start to be able to tell. If we look at the bottom, the kind of tan looking thing is an egg case. That's the Uthika that this little guy hatched out of. And there he goes. He's trying to figure it out. Yeah, they're tiny, but they're mighty. What's interesting, as little bitty mantids, as small as these guys are, they can tackle surprisingly big prey. They eat fruit flies that are sometimes much bigger than their heads. And I don't know how they do it, but they do manage. Kind of fun. All righty. So that is our mantid show. I think we might be ready for questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. We do have a couple questions, and if anyone else has any, now is the time to put them in the Q&A box. Our first question is, do the mantids die after they lay eggs?
In the wild, they tend to. The weather gets cooler and the prey is less abundant. In captive situations, they can go on for months after that, but they tend to do that. It's not from laying eggs. It is just from the lack of prey and that they get old, and they can lay lots of egg cases and have lots of babies. I think some mantids can actually have like 1,000. Not all of them are survived. That's a lot of them.
Wow, very cool. And do the mantids bite?
Well, if you think about what they can do to prey, I just saw my other mantid go over there. That's so funny. They could. These grass mantids can't really get their jaws around you, but I would imagine that the big Chinese ones that you might find up north could give you quite a little nip. So care would be needed. And it is surprising if they do, like if you were feeding one or if it decides to strike at you, they're very, very strong. It's surprisingly strong. Their little forelegs can't really hurt you, but it's amazingly strong. And to get them off your fingers, you got to be really careful not to hurt them because they don't want to let go.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have a couple questions about their diet. What insects do mantids eat, and are there any other types of foods that they eat?
They'll basically eat anything they can catch. And mostly insects. They can eat things that are larger than them, which is pretty darn amazing. And the larger mantids, they can eat bees. I remember seeing a big, giant Chinese mantid eating a bumblebee one time, and you could hear it from a long way off, crunching on it. It was kind of impressive, and it was something. There's also records of them catching hummingbirds and geckos, the bigger species. But most of our mantids, like our Carolina mantid, which is probably our most common one, and these Grasslike Mantids, which I think are probably very common, but hard to see, they stick to smaller, easier to manipulate prey. That was a good question.
Wonderful, thank you. And how many times can a female have her babies? Can that continue on a couple times or more?
Yes, she can lay, gosh, I'm trying to think of how many egg cases. That's a good question. I think and maybe as many as 20 to 50 egg cases, they can have a lot. Now, I think as she gets a little older, fewer and fewer babies will hatch from those egg cases, but they can have a lot of egg cases and a lot of babies. And there are also some that don't need to mate, and they can lay egg cases, and those egg cases will hatch, and they'll hatch into all females. And our Grasslike Mantid is one of the ones that can do that. It's called parthenogenesis. That's a great big word. That means that a female can have lay eggs and have babies without a male.
Very cool. And where in Florida do most of the mantids live?
Like a habitat?
Mm-hmm.
Or, okay, well, I would say you can find them in your gardens, most certainly. Certainly in nature preserves and in woods and fields. You can find them a lot better in places that aren't heavily sprayed. Sometimes in the suburbs, it's hard to find them because we tend to spray our lawns a lot, and that's not terribly good for them. I've seen most of the ones that I found in natural areas, and again, they're really hard to see and hard to find. Good for them.
And what are their average lifespans and how long in between molts?
Very good question. Average lifespan, they can go on probably in the wild is just spring through fall, but I think that they could live for from 9 to 12 months, possibly in captivity, maybe longer than that. That's kind of been my experience there. And between molts, the first molt will happen usually in 10 days, at least the ones that I've seen. I've been studying the grass mantids. The other molts are about 3 to 4, maybe 5 weeks apart, depending on how much they're eating and temperature.
Wonderful.
And molting is hard. I'm glad I don't molt like that.
Right, it sounds very dangerous. There is a question about if Brooker Creek offers a walking group to experience or look for mantids, and I'll go ahead and answer that. We have not started any of our in-person guided hikes back up just yet, but we do plan to pretty soon. We're just getting our volunteers responding and letting us know what they're ready to do as of now. And I think that's a great idea to do one to specifically look for mantids. So thank you for the question. And I think we will have that in our near future. And our next question is, do mantids eat mealworms?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You may have seen in the video that little bug that the mantis did her kung fu on. That was a mealworm. It's kind of hard. Mealworms can be kind of big, so you have to find young ones, and they can certainly eat those. The best prey that I have found for my guys has been fruit flies, and you can get cultures of those. And there's a special way to get the fruit flies out of the culture and into the habitat that the mantids are in so that they can eat them.
Thank you. And the parthenogenic babies that you were talking about, you did say they would all be female, was that correct?
That's correct. There's a species of fish that we actually have here in the Tampa Bay area, and I think I'm going to say it right. It's a mangrove rivulus, and they are just like our parthenogenic mantids, and they don't need males. Actually, I think that our population doesn't really have a whole lot of males. It's all females, and they just kind of do their thing, all female.
And we've got one more question here. As far as where the mantids hang out, do they congregate together or are they often solitary?
They tend to be solitary. They're prone to eating anything they can catch, which would include each other. And I hate to say that, it just sounds so indelicate, but that's just the way it is. When the babies hatch, they disperse or they go their own separate ways so they don't end up trying to eat each other. And they stay away from other bigger mantids, which will try to eat them. Mantids see something moving and they don't really quite understand that, it's one of them. They just are hungry and they want to eat. Nature's way.
Will they also eat crickets?
Yes, they will. Yes, they will eat crickets. One thing to be careful about with crickets is that crickets sometimes will have, because they're somewhat closely related to mantids, they may have bacteria and stuff that aren't terribly good for mantids. So that is something to look up and understand. Now that's in captivity. In the wild, oh yeah, they'll eat crickets, grasshoppers, again, anything they can catch. Bees.
Wonderful. Well, that is all of our questions. We've got a couple thank yous. So thank you so much, Liz. That was wonderful. And it was really nice to meet your mantids as well. That was a special treat. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It was nice to have you with us this morning. And I think Miss Liz may be bringing back her Family Fun Friday morning program that we do for families together in the near future. So look for that later in the summer. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you.